On Harpeth Knoll Court, at number 700, there is a house with a giant tree in its front yard. The tree rises tall, spreading its branches over the property and bringing relief to the residents from the steamy summer heat in Nashville, Tennessee. Inside the home lives another giant, a man everyone calls Jim. A friend to many, a good listener, a persuader, and an evangelizer with a great sense of humor.
I'll just go on until you tell me to shut the hell up.
Through his deep faith and devotion to Mary, Jim built an organization that reaches beyond the Nashville community to spread Christ's saving message with an ecumenical flair. The tree in Jim's yard has seen many seasons. We asked him about the seasons in his life.
I went to school here in Nashville, Tennessee, to Overbrook Grammar School, and then I went away to high school in St. Bernard and Coleman, Alabama. Later I went to Vanderbilt undergraduate and law school, and then I went to the Institute of Lay Theology at the University of San Francisco to get a degree in theology. I got to the bowling late, and this fellow had taken my place, and I said, well, I'm back here to take my place bowling. He said, no, you're late. You're not going to bowl today. I'm going to bowl in your place. So I walked around and saw this cute little brunette girl there bowling, and I wondered who she was, and she turned out to be my wife, Susie. We had a date or two after that and went together for a couple of years. And when I asked her to marry her, we went out to camp, but we had a camp out on the river, and I said, I got something to ask you. I'd like to ask you to get married, but I think you need to know I'm about to leave town and go to California, and hope you can go with me. And she said, I'll go. So that's what happened. I decided to go to California because I read an article in Time magazine about a priest in California by the name of Eugene Zimmers, a young Jesuit priest, who had an idea about training Catholic college graduates to be engaged in evangelization. So it just seemed like something quite interesting to me, and I went out there, checked it out, and then decided to join up. From San Francisco, after completing that course there, I was there for a year and was assigned to San Diego. Was there for several years. After San Diego, I had written the first chapters of a book in San Diego on parish councils, but that was a new thing in the Catholic Church at the time. But the Institute of Lay Theology transferred me at that point to Memphis, Tennessee, and the pastor and I wrote a book together on parish councils, and we had it published by the school board there. And we sold some books, and sold one and was translated into French. I can't read it, but they sent me a copy of it. And at that point then, the Bishop of Nashville asked me to come from Memphis to Nashville to set up parish councils throughout the diocese. So I had finished that work, and I had 4 kids and a mortgage. It was time to go back and get on it, make an honest living, so to speak. I was enjoying the work, but I knew it was time to move on, because someday I would be old and I'd need a retirement, you know, and I don't think the church had anything set up at that time in that area. So I left that, and I happened to have gone to school with the district attorney when I was in college at Vanderbilt. He and I were in the Air Force together. There was an opening in the DA's office. I applied and was accepted and spent the next 20 years putting people in jail.
God's providence works in mysterious ways and intervened in 1986.
Started by accident, really. One day, first of all, it started with a guy named George McClintock.
As the manager of a commercial religious station, we had a client who was claiming Mary was the 4th person of the Trinity.
Well, that upset Protestant ministers in the Nashville area, And so they started calling George, complaining.
So I called a Catholic priest and asked him, did he have anybody that might be able to help her?
And asked Father Miller if he'd come out to the station and talk a little bit about the Catholic understanding of Mary. Well, Miller was tied up, so he said, call Jim Walsh at the DA's office. George called, and so he asked me would I come back and talk a little bit about Mary on the radio. And I went out and did the show, and 3 or 4 weeks later, when we did the show, the calls quit coming. Apparently our show had convinced them that Catholics did not worship Mary, or at least they didn't contend that anymore. Also, they realized Catholics weren't Christian, which some of them didn't know before. So at that point, I said, well, maybe we could do a show on this weekly.
But he was assistant district attorney to my brother, Tom, who was the DA. And I went in one day to visit Tom, and Jim had just started doing this show, asked me to be on it.
So he came out and did one show and never went away. That was 30 years ago.
I'm a Methodist. It's a Catholic show. Basically, my role was to interpret for Protestant listeners what the Catholic ideas were, and to give the comparative Protestant positions, of which there were many. And I think that the role became that of really finding a way for people of different backgrounds to listen to each other, to really understand each other.
And so, 31 years later, having recorded over 400 radio shows and 26 TV shows about the basic teachings of the Catholic faith, Jim and Richard continue to carry on their ecumenical ministry.
Welcome to We Believe, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to you too, Richard.
The We Believe shows have been played in as many as 10 radio stations around the country and 25 TV stations, and broadcasted around the world via shortwave radio.
Having looked at all the religious programs, I came to the conclusion that as far as Catholic programs were concerned, Jim and Richard have the best program in the country.
We have received quite a number of awards from something called the Alliance for Community Media. And every year they have something called a Hometown Video Award. And so you submit your work to them, and they pick out the top ones. So we have won 4 or 5 first place awards. Then recently we won a major award from the Catholic Organization of Professional Communicators. We happened to submit a program that we did. This was done for the life of Christ. That was a dramatic presentation of the life of Christ, and apparently they thought it was pretty good because we won first place.
We do hear from our listeners, but one particular letter that I got that I thought was very significant came from Fresno, California, and it was a young man who was in the 16th year of a 25-year prison sentence. He described what he had done, had been listening to our show, a radio show, and watching our TV show. But he wrote to me wanting answers to some questions, theological questions, which I wrote back.
In 1997, Jim gathered a group of supporters who would help him in his ministry and formed a nonprofit corporation, Catholic Media Productions. Catholic Media Productions has many supporters who give financially and of their time. They bring the message and the spirit of the We Believe show to as many people as possible. In 2013, God's providence intervened again, and the ministry started by Jim took on a new dimension.
I called Jim Walsh and explained to him that the FCC was authorizing applications to be taken for FM radio stations for non-commercial broadcasting. And it seemed like a good idea since there was no Catholic radio station in Nashville and there was no Catholic station in a major metropolitan area in Tennessee.
With the blessing of the Most Reverend David Chobe, Bishop of Nashville, Jim's organization applied for a permit to build a radio station. On November 30th, 2016, Bishop David Chobe launched WBOU 100.5 FM, the first Catholic radio station in Nashville. Today, Catholic Media Productions broadcasts Catholic programs in English and in Spanish 24 hours a day to our community through WBOU and to the world via live streaming on the internet.
Relative to the future of Catholic media production, I think probably the main part of it will be with the radio station. It's the biggest and it's the hot issue right now anyway. But I think what we have done, what Richard and I have done, have got a good start. And as I've said before, I don't think there would have been a radio station to go on in the future if there had not first been a We Believe, which was just a little program that Richard and I did. And I think what will be important in the future is probably the radio station. But hopefully it will still have a rather unusual spin, and that's ecumenism. That is, I don't know if there are many places around that have a Catholic deacon and a Methodist minister talking theology.
This is the story of Catholic Media Productions and of the man who is behind it. The small seedling, planted by Jim and Richard, has become a tall tree with many branches. It is dedicated to the spreading of Christ's message to the Nashville community and to the world.